Good morning.
Good morning.
This morning we start with our new class book for this quarter in auditorium class here. It's on Ezra and Nehemiah. Are there extra copies on the table? If you didn't get one, there's extra copies on the table in the back. Looks like this. Same cover design, just different color and background and different names on it. That's pretty intelligent speaking there, isn't it, Mona? We're glad to have everyone here this morning on this first Sunday of June, June the 2nd. And yesterday was kind of a dreary, rainy day. I guess most everybody got rain yesterday, off and on. But today it appears it's going to be a nice day. We're glad for that. But we're also mostly glad that it's the Lord's Day. We get to assemble ourselves together and worship our God in a few short minutes. Lesson 1, page number 3 in our book. We're going to start off, and we're starting off in the book of Ezra. And our scripture references are going to be from Ezra 1, chapter 1, verses 1 through 8, and then also chapter 2, verses 64 through 70. What I like to do is start off and read the two texts that our lesson is going to be based off of. Do we have a volunteer for the first section? The wheel spinning, it falls on Jim. All right, Jim, if you read Ezra 1 through 8, we'll start there.
Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth the Lord God of heaven has given me, and he has commanded me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is among you of all his people? May his God be with him. And let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel, he is God, which is in Jerusalem. And whoever is left in any place where he dwells, let the men of his place help him, with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, besides the freewill offerings for the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. Then the heads of the father's house of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, with all whose spirits God had moved, arose to go up and build the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem. And all those who were around them encouraged them with articles of silver and gold, with goods and livestock, and with precious things besides all that was willingly offered. King Cyrus also brought out the articles of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from Jerusalem and put in the temple of his God. And Cyrus, king of Persia, brought them out by the hand of Mithridates, the treasurer, and counted them out to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Who wants to read chapter 2, verses 64 through 70? Okay, Doug, thank you. Drachmas. Mm-hmm.
5,000 minas of silver and 100 priestly garments. So the priests and Levites and some of the people, the singers, gatekeepers, the Midian, dwelt in their cities, and all Israel and visited.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have a setting here of some events that are going to be taking place, beginning in Ezra here. And then on into Nehemiah. But the backdrop of this, as you know, the history of the Israelites, the Jews, the children of Israel has been up and down, okay? We know from their time of their exodus from Egypt that God was taking care of them. He was looking after them. He was providing for them, and they, had nothing to fear, really. What's the old saying? Nothing to fear but fear itself, and they let fear itself start driving some of their thoughts as they wandered through the wilderness. Because of their ups and downs with their faith, their willingness to fall back onto the desires and complaining about their situation, the desires of, we wish we were back in Egypt, we had it so good, and they kind of forgot what that was all about, didn't they, Bill? So, but they complained and they moaned and they just, became discontent at times, right? God got angry with them. He would punish them in various ways. We can read through their journey through the wilderness and see some of those things happening. It resulted in death to several of them. And ultimately it resulted in those that originally came out of Egypt, all but a few were not allowed to go across into the promised land, across the Jordan, when all that journey was over. 40 years in the wilderness, right? So we still have a history. We still have a history of the Israelite, the Jews, breaking away from God, from their faithfulness, from their duties and their worship of God. They would intermarry with certain peoples they were told not to. And why was that? It was mainly because they would be influenced. And they would tend to lose their religiosity, if that's even a word, their dedication to God, because they would marry someone who was a pagan, who was worshiping other gods, who came from that background, and then they would just, for whatever reason, would abandon God and start worshiping idols and start worshiping these pagan gods of the peoples of which they were intermarrying with. So there were those issues going on at different times and different things. So God, He finally told them, through the prophet Isaiah, you're going to go into captivity. And we're going to read this in just a minute. In fact, if someone would be turning to Isaiah chapter 44, and we're going to read verses 24 through verse 28. And Chuck, if you don't mind, if you would, when you get there, we'll nod your head at me and we'll let you read that. But we're going to see what the prophet of old, Isaiah, told these people would happen. And we're going to hit on something very interesting after we read this as to, what the time frame was on when he told them and when the event actually happened. If you have it, Chuck, go ahead. Isaiah 24, verses 40, saying that all wrong. Isaiah 44, verses 24 through 28.
Thus saith the Lord, your Redeemer, and He who formed you from the womb. I am the Lord who makes all things, who stretches out the heavens all alone, who spreads abroad the earth by myself, who frustrates the signs of the battle, and drives the lions mad. Who turns wise men backwards, and makes their knowledge foolishness, who confirms the word of his servant, and performs the counsel of his messenger, who says to Jerusalem, you shall be inhabited, to the cities of Judah, you shall be built, and I will raise up your waste places. Who says to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up your rivers. Who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall perform all my pleasure. Who says to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple your foundation shall be laid.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. Now, I got a little ahead of myself. This is actually the prophecy from Isaiah to the children of Israel that they are actually going to come out of this captivity that they're about to go into. But what makes this remarkable is how far ahead of time from the events that happened from them going into the captivity was Isaiah prophesying this. Does anybody know? I'm not looking for maybe for an exact number, but yes. Isn't that remarkable? He was telling them over 100 years before it was even going to happen that they were going to be delivered out of it. Now, let's jump ahead. Someone read Jeremiah chapter 25, and we're going to read verses 8 through verses 12. 8 through 12 from the prophet Jeremiah chapter 25. Whoever has that?
Therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, because ye have not heard my voice. Behold, I will send and take all the families of the north, saith the Lord, and Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them against this land, and against the inhabitants thereof, and against all these nations round about, and will utterly destroy them, and make them an astonishment and a hissing, perpetual desolation. Moreover, I will take from them the voice of mirth, and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom, and the voice of the bride, the sound of the millstones, and the light of the candle. And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment. And these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. And it shall come to pass, when 70 years are accomplished, that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, saith the Lord, for their iniquity and the land of the Chaldeans, and will make it a perpetual desolation.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. So here we have, again, from Isaiah, the prophecy over 100 years before the event even takes place is that you will be released. God's going to take care of you. You're going to be able to come out of that captivity. Jeremiah tells them, this is why you're going into captivity. God is not pleased. So he allows this to happen. He allows this the Babylonian Empire to take these folks into captivity. And notice this, Isaiah mentions the person who's going to basically let them go. Again, 100-something years before. And who was that person? Cyrus. Okay? Now, Jeremiah tells them how long they're going to be in this captivity. And how long was that going to be? 70 years. This wasn't by happenstance. This wasn't by some lucky guess. You know, today and all throughout modern history, I guess, there's been people who have predicted several things, right? How many times have you heard that the world is about to end? That there might be some groups, and the leader of that group that gives a specific date. There are some people who would take and tell you that the events of today, what's happening in the Middle East between Hamas and Israel, and the tensions in the Middle East between Iran and Israel and the United States, and then you've got Iraq, and all these things going on, right? How many times have you heard someone say, you see, prophecy's being fulfilled from Revelation, isn't it? These are the last days. How many years have you been hearing that?
Every generation
Exactly.
thinks that, of course, this is the most important time in the history of the world. This is the time that God is going to do all these things that
Right.
predicted back here.
I've been looking facetiously. I've been looking for a plot of land that I can park a souvenir trailer and a food truck on in the valley of where this war is supposed to take place. That everybody says still coming because the book of Revelations talks about it, right? These were not just predictions, but they were spoken because God told these prophets to make these statements, to make these utterances, that these things were going to occur. Do you think, and this is purely conjecture on our part, but do you think very many people took Isaiah's prophecy and took it seriously and thinking, well, I guess we're going to go through something pretty bad, but at the end of it all, we're going to come out of it. Maybe some did, maybe a lot of them didn't. I don't know. Well, that's a long time away to hear something, and then it comes down to the fact, you think these things were passed down to their children and their children's children to say, hey, beware. Jeremiah tells them specifically 70 years. Now we know Daniel recognized that, right? From the readings and everything like that. He understood and realized it was going to be 70 years, and that was somewhat approaching when he was in captivity. So the events that God put in place and the people that God used to carry out these events is amazing. You know, we think about people like Moses, man of God. We think about Noah, man of God. We think about these people. But Cyrus, king of Persia, he wasn't a man of God. In fact, the indications are that he worshiped other idols and other gods, even some of the Babylonian gods. But God used him. He used him for a specific purpose. So, interesting on the prophecies. Turn over to page 6. The author makes a statement. He says, had the people of Judah listened to their prophets, they would have known much about their coming trials, particularly that God had intended to bring them back safely to Jerusalem. Whether or not all the captives believed God would eventually restore his people to Jerusalem, some certainly did, because after this happens, when they are released and told they can go back to rebuild the temple, a significant number of them go. Right? Not as many as we might have thought would go, but a significant number did. So, let's jump down into the bottom of that page where it says Cyrus proclaims. The return from Babylonian captivity began during the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. That comes out of verse 1 that we read of Ezra chapter 1. Although Cyrus reigned over Persia starting in 55-59 BC, the reference in the text is to his first year of rule after conquering the Babylonians 539 BC. Now, why does the author feel the need to bring that out? There are people that are looking to say the Bible contradicts itself, right? There's always people looking to say, well, see, that's why it's not true. It's just made up stories, or it's just fallible men that wrote these words. But the indication is, what did the prophecy about King Cyrus talk about? Because the children of Israel were not captured by the Persians, were they? Who were they in captivity with? Who captured them? Who caused them to be enslaved? Babylon, right? But what happened to Babylon? They were taken over by who? The Persians, right? Did God not tell them that? What's that? Yeah. God said that would happen, didn't he? He said he'd bring down the king of Babylon. So here it's happened. So this is the first year of the reign of King Cyrus of Persia after taking over and capturing Babylon. And that's what that means. So there's no contradiction here. That's a fact, right?
And the reason no doubt was to bring it up and get it straight is because to show that the 70 years was actually 70 years, right?
Yes.
From the time they went to the time they began their time.
Exactly. Okay. All right, so let's jump on over to page 7 here. Historically, Cyrus is remembered as being benevolent toward his subjects. According to Bible professor Mervyn Brenneman, Cyrus encouraged the peoples he conquered to develop their own culture and continue their own religion. He and some of his successors even helped support local priests in conquered nations. Now, this is quite a contradiction from Nebuchadnezzar, right? From the ruler of Babylon and the way they treated. He's probably a lot different from anybody else that had ever conquered a nation. Most of the time, a conquering nation would take those people, make them submit. Obviously, they'd become slaves. Think about Egypt. They may not let them worship in the way they want to. They may not let them have their culture in place and do the things that they want to do because they're captive. I don't know that would happen these days in modern times, but so this is a little bit of a unique situation in my mind. Does anybody have a...
It happened in the United States of America. You know, in the wars that we fought, we could have, you know, we were in position, for example, after World War II, to have imposed our will if we had wished to. Instead, we did the Marshall Plan, right?
Right.
You know, rebuild the nations rather than imposing our government or whatever on them.
Right.
That's a notable case.
Probably the biggest example of that is the country of Japan, nation of Japan, how we rebuilt that. And then they beat us in producing transistor radios and DVRs and all that good stuff, right? Cars? Yeah, cars. Okay. So think about this though. God is going to use him. This is part of God's plan, right? He's going to use him to initiate this release from captivity and allow them to go back to build the temple on the same site as we read later. Cyrus' proclamation began by giving God the glory and acknowledging that God had commanded him to build a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. If we only considered this remarkable statement, we might conclude that Cyrus was a worshiper of God. Such, however, was not the case. He goes on for another gentleman to talk about that, what I mentioned about worshiping maybe the God of the Babylonians and other things there. Who else? Now, I mentioned earlier, we think about Moses, we'll think about Noah, we think about a lot of different people, David, other people who were God's people to do his bidding, to do his will, to carry out his plan. But tell me some other people that God used that were not his people. They may not even worshiped and totally believed it. They may recognize him as the God of the Israelites, but they didn't necessarily worship him. And yet they were used to do some things that God wanted carried out. Somebody throw out a name. I don't have a buzzer. I won't buzz you right or wrong. Who? Saul. Yes. He became a man of God, yeah. Okay. Who else? Becky, your eyebrows are going up. Who? It's on the tip of your tongue.
I'm not sure if Esther
Who? Esther. Okay. Well, she was a woman.
Well, she convinced the king.
Okay. And what was his name? I was trying to remember. It wasn't that long ago we taught it. Was it? It was Ashurus? Yeah. So he was used in that, right? And as the influence of Esther on him. Okay. So there's other examples of that. And that's one thing that we, when we study these events and these characters and these situations, that we realize that God sometimes uses other nations, other peoples throughout history to have accomplished things and sometimes they were used to teach a lesson to those of his own people. I mean, we see that with the history of the Israelites, right? And maybe he used maybe right here, the captivity for 70 years was to teach a lesson to the children of Israel, right?
Randy, back on your point about Cyrus worshiping, other gods and so on. The New King James Version in verse 3 here, has the phrase there, and this is words from Cyrus's mouth or pen or whatever, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
The verse 3 in the New King James has him saying, "He is God," as though he's attesting that Jehovah is the God. But other versions have it differently.
Mm-hmm.
The New American Standard on that says he is the God who is in Jerusalem. In other words, that puts an entirely different thing on it.
Right.
He is the God. He is recognizing him as being the God of these people.
Right. And he appears to be a man who, because of the way, and this is again based on someone else, and I guess it was a commentary. This, what was his name in here? Keith Chauville, a professor of Hebrew and Semitic studies. I'll just read this. Pointed to how historical evidence shows that Cyrus spoke to the Babylonians of fulfilling the commands of Marduk, patron god of Babylon, and it is probable that he practiced the religion of Zoroaster and honored their god, their good god, Ahura Mazda. I think a lot of kings and back in these times a lot of them recognize the God of Israel as being the God of Israel. We have statements all throughout about talking about your God, the God of your people. And sometimes you often think, well, are they kind of like those people at Mars Hill in the New Testament, where Paul ventured upon them and saw that they had all these altars to these different gods, and then one sitting over here to the unknown God. And it almost makes me think that some folks like this, Cyrus maybe he was afraid to not recognize someone's God. I mean, why would you capture a people and recognize their God unless you're afraid maybe that, well, in case he's the real deal, I want to make sure that, I'm not treating anybody bad or I'm not doing this or whatever. I don't know. Just a thought on my part. So, but according to the author of the workbook here, it's an indication that most likely he was not a worshiper of the true God. But I think to Jim's point, I think he recognized and recognized that it was important for the children of Israel to go back to Judah and to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem to worship their God. I don't know if there's any indication that Cyrus would have ever made the trek himself after the temple was built to worship, or that he became anything other than still what he was. But it's interesting that because of his nature, because of his benevolence and stuff, that he was used for this occasion. And the author here in the book says, let's be careful. Don't take it that he came upon this just out of his total good nature. God had his hand on it, right? Just like we talked about with Esther and the situation with King Ahasuerus, right? He found favor with Esther, which led up to things that caused him to react in a way that maybe otherwise he would not have, being favorable toward her and allowing that declaration to go out. And not that they were protected per se, but that they were allowed to defend themselves, right? Against what was going to possibly be an annihilation on their part. Okay. So down at the bottom of page 7, Cyrus made this decree. He proclaims that they now can go. He says that he makes a statement that, hey, your God, any of you that want to go back and rebuild the temple can go. If there's any of you out there living in the areas, and I'm going to say cities, I don't know if they were exactly cities, but there were a lot of territories under these empires, right? But he says, any of you that want to go back, you can go. And he says, make provisions for going. We're going to make available this stuff for you. And on top of that, something very important in my mind. What did he have done regarding these provisions, providing these materials, allowing collections to be made for this stuff, to be taken back so that the temple could be rebuilt? What did he do that had, to me, had great significance in that matter? Where did he take them from? From the temple, didn't he? Those would have been very special. They would have held a very special place, right, for the children of Israel. And he knows that. He recognizes that. And so he instructs those things to be given back, right? So they can be taken with them. So no doubt this man had a generous humanitarian heart. There's a lot of good people in the world, aren't there? Not all of them worship in the right way, believe in the true God, follow the things that they're supposed to follow, but there are some good people out there.
Randy, you could also make a case, I think, that this was a pretty good approach to governance. I mean, nobody could really, the most powerful of kings, never had enough armies, to stand by everybody and make them all do what they wanted to in
Right.
the nations. And so, really to have goodwill and to let the nations have their culture that they overcome. Let them have their culture and within reason their own governance and so forth, answering to them. It seems like in some ways, back when we studied the previous study about that Babylonian Empire, 3 months ago.
Right.
They still had their same languages within, we were told there that this decree was written in all these different languages, right, of the different provinces. They didn't insist that everybody give up their languages and all that. So
Right.
in some ways, they did some of the same thing back under the Babylonian Empire, but he apparently took it to a whole different level.
Right. I think, and the culmination of that, of what he took it to, was the willingness to let them go back. To let them go back and do this. Okay. So he gives these provisions. He gives the things that were taken out of the temple by Nebuchadnezzar. And I think he mentions it was about 5,400, I guess, pieces. They were like gold and silver, maybe some goblets, maybe some plates and things of that nature. But these things that were in the temple. And so that would have had a very big significance to the people, to the children of Israel. And on the next page, on the top of page 8, he mentions, importantly, the proclamation did not require Jews to return. It merely offered the opportunity. So he's not throwing them out of his country, out of his empire, but he is saying, if you want to go, go. Sometimes in our households these days, you may have an 18, 19-year-old who's still in the house, and they're going, well, I'm going to leave. Well, if you want to go, go. I'm not going to hold you back. I'm not throwing you out. Next year I'll throw you out.
25 or 30.
Or watch out, my mom's listening. I did move back in for a period of time. Not long, but just a little while. Might have been long for her. In page 8 there, in the middle there, it talks about in the response to this proclamation, many of the Jews made provisions to return from Babylon to Jerusalem. We mentioned the number was about, I think, 42,000 is what they mentioned, and that didn't include, I think that didn't include the number of slaves, the number of or servants, the number of, there were singers, men and women singers, the Levites, and others that were among that group that went back. But there were several that didn't. Now think about this. 70 years. I know that people lived a little bit longer in most respects back in those times. But how many people do you think were in captivity that were Israelites who may not have even lived back in Judah before they were captured and taken over into Babylonian captivity? How many people do you think were born while in captivity?
What was the average lifespan? You know, that makes you wonder too, were the ones that went, that means really came back that started it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That'd be interesting to find out. Maybe
It wouldn't be surprising if the majority were born.
that's what I would think. Yeah.
Well, Jeremiah told them to make their home in, in Babylon at that time, the land and prosper and act like everything was normal.
Yeah. Yeah, he did. Yeah. So there's a good chance that a lot of them, maybe some of them were like, well, this is my home. This is my home now. But here's the interesting thing. The ones that went, the ones that stayed, it is given an indication that they gave to the cause. Okay? That they gave to the cause. The ones that went gave of themselves to the cause. Cyrus gave to the cause, not just, I'm not considering him turning over the stuff that was taken out of the temple by Nebuchadnezzar as giving to the cause. That was just releasing what was already theirs. But he, on top of that, he basically said, out of the treasury of the kingdom, we'll pay for any other expenses, basically, that you might run across that you need, that you don't have. So we circle back to this. How many have ever been on a mission trip? Now, I'll start off by first saying out of the country. Raise your hand. You're not in camera shot. I'm the only one on the camera, so no one will watch. Okay. How many have done it I will call it domestically, the United States, or maybe we'll call Mexico, Canada, and the United States? How many have gone? Okay. How many have contributed to a work that either we supported here at Shades Mountain? Of course, if we supported at Shades Mountain, you basically contributed because we supported it out of the treasury, right? But on your own, outside of that, how many of you have contributed in some way to the work, say, anywhere? Anywhere, okay? So you see, not everybody can go, right? Not everybody can teach, right? Not everybody can preach. Not everybody can do this or that or whatever, but everybody can give support. And I don't mean just monetarily. What about your prayers? You think there was some praying going on? For those that didn't go, for those that did go, that things would go well and that they could accomplish their task? So we need to see that there are different levels here. And I think that's a good point that's brought out in showing us that, is that, because at first we may think, why didn't they all go? They were free. They could all go. He didn't say only 40,000 can go. But he didn't say everybody's got to go, right? So there are different levels, and in the church today, we need to make sure we understand that. You know, Randy, I can't do that, but I can do this over here. I can't do that, but I can do this over here. I'm still working full time, all that. I just can't, I'm not going to be able to go on a 2 and 3 week or 2 month trip to visit Hong Kong and the Pacific Islands work, India, this and that and the other. But I can help in other ways. Well, $5 is not a whole lot. $5 more than what they had before. If it's a monetary thing, you can pray, I can pray that the work is successful, that many more, we get the reports. We're getting that report quite regularly from New Hampshire. That's a mission field.
And interestingly, Randy, and the lady that came out said, well, Chad sent that out yesterday, I guess, or the day before. But in the little masthead of Brother Berger's little report, he has this every time. Some give by going to missions. Some go by giving to missions. Without both, there would be no mission.
Exactly.
I mean, that's a terrific place. And the thing about it, back to what you're saying, if everybody, if we did like a lot of them that were in Jerusalem tried to do in New Testament times, and all, maybe just quit our jobs and so on, and try to do mission work, there would be funds nobody would have support, right?
Right.
A big percentage of Christian people have got to work and make money in order for the minority, to go overseas and so on.
Exactly.
I mean, it's the expensive proposition.
Very much. And even more so now, in these days and times.
Taking money.
Yeah, it sure does. So there was a clear purpose.
But it's like it says in Romans 10, you can't have preachers unless somebody sent them. So we got more as a command, there's some sin.
Right. It's our obligation. Right. It's our obligation. All right, I see that our time is up. So a couple of things. Number one, we should not underestimate the role that Cyrus played in this whole thing. But we also need to very much realize that God was in control. God used him in this situation to accomplish these things were prophesied about very long before they ever happened. Number one, that they would be released from this captivity by a man named Cyrus. That's pretty specific, right? And Jeremiah said, this is why you're going, and you're going for 70 years. And at the end of the 70 years, the first year of the reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, who had taken over the Babylonians and had conquered them, his first year was that 70th year. Amazing. God's plan. God's plan. It worked. It always works. So what is God's plan? What is His plan for us? What is His plan for us at Shades Mountain? Do you ever ask yourself that? What's God's plan for me? Randy Wright. What's His plan? His plan's in this book, the Bible, right? He doesn't speak it. He doesn't speak it to Ronnie, who then imparts it to us. If he does, it's through his word. He doesn't speak it to Mel, who stands up and gives us a prophetic statement. It comes through his word, right? I preached a couple of Sundays ago now on Jonah. You can run, but you cannot hide. We can't hide. We cannot run from our obligations. If we do, we're going to end up not just 70 years of punishment, but an eternity when the judgment happens. 70 years is a long time. 5 years from now, I will have lived 70 years upon this earth if I'm still alive. That's a long time. And it, Doug said, yeah, you're old, Randy. It's a long time. But can you grasp eternity? Can you grasp it? And somebody says, well, it won't matter because time will be no more. You're right. But you'll never get away from it. Let's be on the good side of it. Let's fulfill our obligations. Let's don't run and hide. And let's be ready and willing and able. These folks have been there 70 years, but there were some that was ready, willing, and able. When that command was given, when that decree was given, they were ready to go back and do the work. Others who didn't, maybe they couldn't, were willing to give and contribute so that the work could be done. Man, that's a sermon right there on preaching and teaching God's Word. Go ye into all the world. That's a sermon on giving, right? Our free will offering. And I didn't touch on that. They gave of their free will. No one told them you got to give 10% or 20% of what you have here. Free will. There's a lesson on giving there, Mona. I just preached 2 sermons right there. All right, the bell has rung. We'll meet back in here at 30 minutes after for our worship service. Thank you for your attention. And again, Ezra and Nehemiah, these 2 books. I don't think I covered anybody's message for next week. I don't even know who's teaching next week. Mark, okay. Mark is teaching next week. So, interesting study. If you don't have a book, please go back and get one. Thank you.